Demokratie.
Europa ist eben viel mehr.
Zusammenarbeit zwischen den Völkern.
Freedom.
Bürger der Europäischen Union.
Poland waited a long time to join the European Union. It finally acceded with 7 other Eastern European countries in 2004. We've come to Warsaw to see how the EU has changed people's lives. Jarek Smetana is one of Europe's leading guitarists and the star of this event. But this jazz legend is a modest, good-natured man. He tells the MC that the real stars are all the other performers on stage that night. The Warsaw Philharmonic's concert hall is usually a classical venue, but today it's welcoming Smetana. Perhaps the solidarity between 2 musical genres reflects the fact that both are going through hard times. Before Poland joined the EU, jazz concerts filled entire auditoriums. But now it doesn't seem to be what people want. Jarek Smetana is up against pop and techno and a highly commercialized music industry in Poland. As an artist, Smetana deplores the way music has been reduced to a business, but he's thrilled with the new Europe without borders. He tells us how a friend recently called from France asking him to play at a concert. The next day, Smetana was in Paris. Inconceivable a few years ago, when he would have waited weeks to get a visa. He invites us to visit him in his hometown, Kraków. But first, we have a look around Warsaw. The Polish capital has become a cosmopolitan place. Companies from around the world have opened offices here. Renata Juszkiewicz works for one of them. She's a Warsaw native whom we met for the first time over 10 years ago. Back then, she was the press spokeswoman for the German retailer. Now she's one of its directors, in charge of nearly 150 branches throughout Poland. We accompany her on an inspection in a shopping center.
No, wygląda całkiem smakowicie.
We want to know whether the EU accession helped advance Renata Juszkiewicz's career.
Halo? Dzień dobry, Renata Juszkiewicz.
On the whole, yes, she says. We can hear a note of pride when she tells us she's also president of the Polish Organization of Commerce and Distribution. The group represents the interests of all the major retail companies in Poland.
Organizacji jest dbanie o prawidłową harmonizację prawa unijnego na rynku polskim, oczywiście w kontekście handlu.
We think back to our first meeting with Renata Juszkiewicz in 1999. Back then, Warsaw was not yet in the international business swing. The young public relations officer was an enthusiastic fan of the European Union. She was looking forward to exchanging views and profiting from experience abroad. She said Poles had been waiting for this opportunity for generations. It's not unusual to find women in top positions in Poland, and Renata's success story is not unique. But the secret of her success has been her excellent training and her language abilities.
Aha, dobrze, zaraz to sobie zobaczę. Dziękuję bardzo. Renata Juszkiewicz, hallo. Ja, sehr gerne. Ja, ich bin jetzt momentan beschäftigt. Ja, danke. Okay, ich rufe Sie zurück. Danke. Alles klar, Wiedersehen.
But this businesswoman has a stressful job. She's constantly shuttling between Warsaw, Brussels, and Düsseldorf. That doesn't leave her much time for her 6-year-old son. Renata is already thinking about his education, and she's thrilled with the opportunities that have opened up for young Poles.
Na tym, że mogą studiować poza granicami kraju, na tym, że mogą poznawać świat.
She says she's especially glad young people can study abroad and keep in touch with friends all over the world via the internet. They're likely to speak French, English, or German, she says, and she hopes that from year to year they'll become more and more European, as she puts it.
Będzie się poprawiać.
From Warsaw, we follow the river Vistula to the town of Kazimierz Dolny. Then farther south into the mining region of Silesia, to Gliwice. After a stop-off in Kraków, we head north to the village of Subkowy. Our journey ends in the seaport of Gdynia on the Baltic. The small, picturesque town of Kazimierz Dolny is a well-known tourist destination. So we stop here on our way to Silesia. We're in luck. It's market day. But when we ask the farmers about the EU and its reforms, we sense their disappointment. This apple grower says basically they're all doing well, but he complains that the fruit prices have plummeted. His apples are his livelihood. The Poles still pay in złotys. The country is set to join the Eurozone in 2015. But many people here don't care one way or the other. They say rural areas profit less from the EU than big cities do anyway. This farmer says she's got neither the time nor the money for a holiday. All she earns goes towards her daughter's education. And she claims that support from Brussels won't even buy her diesel for her tractor. But we hear other views too. The smell of fresh bread has drawn us to the bakery around the corner. The owner, Barbara Saszinska, is very enthusiastic about Europe. She tells us the EU has completely changed her business. The subsidies she applied for and received from EU headquarters in Brussels paid for modern ovens. Since then, she says, thanks to the new technology, she's doubled her sales. In fact, the traditional rooster-shaped bread is now baked in ovens made in Germany. The bakery's employees are glad their jobs are more secure, and we tourists have an unusual souvenir. But we need to hurry on our way to Gliwice, and this man is the reason. It's not so easy to cross the Vistula. There are too few bridges in the area. The EU has agreed to help. The small car ferry shortens our trip by 50 kilometers. Even in the bucolic region around Kazimierz Dolny, there are signs of the country's opening to the EU. Henryk Wiadrowski ferries visitors from around the world. The skipper says his passengers come from Spain, Britain, and Italy, all over Europe, and in the summertime, from even as far away as the United States.
Na amerykańskich numerach są samochody.
On arrival in Gliwice, we go to see a former miner, Jan Drozdowski. We taped him back in 1999, and we're eager to find out how life has been treating him since.
Te 10 lat dobrze mi się powodzi.
Jan says he's doing very well. He's built himself a little house in peaceful, green surroundings.
Wśród zieleni i ciszy.
The miner is now a contented retiree. His daughter Marta often visits him and helps him cook. Dishes like his favorite sauerkraut stew, bigos.
No, Marta, już zrobiłem na dworze wszystko. I nalej mi troszkę soczku do picia, bo mi się pić chce.
Dobra.
Już nie ma kopalni.
We look at the footage from over a decade ago. There are a lot of memories here. Jan had worked in the mine for 25 years. And when the Gliwice pit closed, his future looked bleak.
Trochę smutno, że to tak się kończy.
Back then he told us he saw no prospects for the future. But now he says many of his former co-workers are doing well, thanks to generous settlements.
Przedtem inne czasy, ludzi pełno, pracowali wszyscy.
Jetzt geht es zu Ende. Keine Perspektive mehr.
Takiej perspektywy. No, raczej nie spotkałem się, żeby narzekali, że
He says he hardly knows anyone whose situation has worsened since Poland joined the EU. Most of the former miners are retired now, and Jan says they feel freer than they did before, politically as well.
myślenie takie bardziej otwarte.
For centuries, Gliwice lived from coal. Now the driving force is education. The former mine has been turned into a modern college. Jan Drozdowski hardly recognizes his old workplace.
Tu pracowało w tak dobrych czasach. To
At times there were 7,000 miners here on this early shift, he recalls.
5,000, a na samym końcu no to 3,000 pracowało ludzi.
Nearly everything has changed here. A foreign language college has replaced the pit heads. The complex is full of students, not miners. There's not much resemblance to the images from 1999. It's the EU that made this transformation possible. Brussels gave 10 million euros in funding, matching 10 million from Gliwice. Jan seems genuinely impressed, and we have a good feeling as we continue on our trip. Kraków is Poland's cultural capital. We take up Jarek Smetana on his invitation. We first met the jazz guitarist in 1999 in the historic Old Town. Back then, he was already well known and always ready with a joke. He told us that Krakow's pretzels were more worth seeing than any of the tourist sites. But today, the jazzman sees the world through more serious eyes. Since Poland joined the EU, its art scene has been under commercial pressure. If music isn't profitable, it won't be picked up by sponsors or the media. And that's become a big problem for Polish jazz musicians. During communism, jazz was an expression of freedom and protest.
Działanie artystyczne na robienie muzyki czy sztuki na poziomie
Jarek tells us it's gotten harder and harder to pursue a career in jazz.
trudności. Jest to po prostu ciężka, kamienista droga, którą z uporem maniaka
He's been
wybrałem.
following a
Jest
long,
dlatego,
rocky
że
road for 30 years,
udaje mi się
obsessively, as he
nią
puts it.
podążać. I właściwie
But
miał
he still has
posłuchać,
hope that
tej
Polish
myśli, dlatego
jazz
to jest
will see
właściwie,
better days.
Ta konsekwencja to jest właściwie odpowiedź na to.
From the world of music back to the countryside, to the village of Subkowy in northern Poland. We recognize Henryk Jocinski immediately. He's now in his 60s and gives us the same warm welcome he did back in 1999.
O, dzień dobry. No, w ciągu 10 lat gospodarstwo się
We ask what's happened since we last saw him.
o 4-krotnie, tak mi się wydaje.
His farm has quadrupled in size, increasing from 50 to 200 hectares, he tells us proudly.
A było 50, jak to przypominam, i mamy w tej chwili przeszło 200 sztuk bydła, plus około 500-600 sztuk trzody
He now has
chlewnej.
200 cows and 600 pigs, and he gets agricultural subsidies from Brussels. We're surprised to hear that.
To proszę, zapraszam do
Henryk
mieszkania.
invites us into his home.
Teraz przybyło, to tam nas trochę więcej tutaj.
It's Sunday, and the whole family has gathered for lunch. The division of labor is pretty traditional. The women do the cooking, while the man of the house looks in once in a while.
W końcu zaraz siadamy.
Nothing much has changed here, but our host is a modern-style patriarch. We're surprised how progressive his views are on some topics.
Muszą być przygotowani żyć w Polsce i żyć w
For example, he insists his children and grandchildren get a good education to make life easier for them in Poland or abroad. He says learning languages is the key to a good life.
Bo to jest wyjście na świat i godnego życia potem.
This large family can make ends meet, but the Orzynskis are living from their savings. And there's a skeptical mood at the table. Many hopes have not been fulfilled.
Wydawało się,
Henrik's wife tells us how great everything seemed after Poland acceded to the EU. But then came the crisis, and prices for produce dropped. She thinks everything is dictated from EU headquarters.
Niewyobrażalna.
Her husband agrees, adding that farmers in Western Europe are getting even more subsidies.
Mamy takie porównanie nawet do dopłat obszarowych.
He thinks it's only natural for Polish farmers to make comparisons.
Można przyjąć 140 gdzieś euro.
The 140 euro per hectare subsidy pales beside the annual 400 to 500 euros he says go to farmers in the older EU member states.
Euro do hektara.
Back in 1999, Henryk Jocinski thought things would be different. He had clear ideas about the assistance that had to come from Brussels. Even then, he suspected that Polish farmers could not survive without subsidies.
Na start żeśmy powinni dostać kredyty nawet.
And he was far-sighted enough to call for cheap bridging loans from the EU so that Poles could compete with the West.
Narzucane przez Unię.
But instead of affordable credit, they got EU-style bureaucracy.
Na podstawie tego też wypisuje agencja paszporty.
Jocinski and his daughter-in-law say they spend entire evenings registering the animals.
Mniej zapisali, A agencja według map wyliczyła, że powinno być tego więcej, no ale...
Every cow, every pig has its own document. And if the farmers make a mistake, they're in trouble, they tell us. The EU inspectors are extremely picky and will even take aerial photos to contest claims.
Tutaj jest nad Wisłą, to jest rzepak.
A tu jest zasiany rzepak i gorczyca.
But EU membership has had little effect on everyday farm work, just that the equipment is a bit more modern now, and every farm animal has an ear tag. Before we continue on our way, we ask Henryk what he thinks about the future of farming in Poland.
Polska wieś będzie już
He predicts that in a few years, Polish villages will hardly be any different from villages in the West. Although he thinks larger farms will soon conform to EU norms, the problem will be the smallholders. They'll have to choose between welfare and giving up altogether, says Henryk Juczynski.
Albo już oddadzą swoje gospodarstwa dzierżawe lub sprzedawy.
But for him, that's not an option. The roots have to nourish the trunk, he tells us as we say goodbye and continue on our way. This is our last stretch along the Vistula. We're getting closer to our destination on the Baltic Sea. The historic resort of Sopot on the Baltic Sea has profited from EU membership. Soon there'll be a new marina here, catering to sailors from all over Europe, thanks to money from the EU. The man we've come to see used to deal with much larger ships than the ones that stop here. When we first met him over 10 years ago, he headed Poland's largest shipyard in nearby Gdynia. Today, he's an influential economic advisor. A lot has changed since 1999. His former shipyard no longer builds merchant ships. Janusz Szlanta, a generally optimistic man, appears somber.
Myślę, że momentami taka pewna frustracja, która przez nas przemawia.
He tells us that he and many of his business friends are unhappy with the way things have gone.
Dzięki własnym wysiłkom, wsparciu Unii Europejskiej.
He admits that Poland has improved a lot, but it pains him that the tremendous opportunity he saw a decade ago was missed. Janusz Szlanta had big plans back then. He wanted to restructure and expand Poland's shipbuilding industry. When we met him in Gdynia in 1999, the energetic executive was about to buy a shipyard in Finland. Order books were full, and Szlanta was one of Poland's movers and shakers. With Germany ordering boats, jobs appeared secure. The shipyard workers were doing well. But Szlanta was ousted, and the deal never went through. After that, things went slowly downhill. In fact, Gdynia's seaport is still doing well. Despite the financial crisis, cargo volumes have risen. But the problem is the historic shipyard. We've never seen the works gate so empty. No more ships are being built, and few are here for repairs. Szlanta, the experienced manager, still believes in the future of shipbuilding. Together with the head of the Solidarity Trade Union in Gdynia, he's trying to find pragmatic solutions to save the works from going under completely.
Jak się zamknie jedną, dwie czy pięć fabryk samochodów w
If a car factory closes down in Europe, 5 more will pop up elsewhere, Szlanta says. But he's convinced that closing shipyards in Poland would trigger the end of the shipbuilding industry in all of Europe.
Ale również w istotnej części Europy.
Since joining the EU, Poland has been a country in flux. Our trip has shown us how Poles are facing up to the problems and how they're finding ways to solve them.